Peter,
Okay.
it's all yours, and you might want to introduce yourself first.
Thank you. Before I do that, can everybody see the screen? Has the screen come up okay with the presentation? Right, I can see thumbs and hands. Thank you very much. Well, it's very good of you all to give up a nice, warm, late summer evening to join us. And from my point of view, it's great to see so many familiar faces and old friends. Thank you very much. For those of you who don't know me, I've been involved in the movement against nuclear weapons for too many years to remember. I used to be the director of Nuclear Information Service, and I now work for Drone Wars UK, looking at new military technologies. And for most of that time, I've also been involved with the Nukewatch network. So that's what we're going to be talking about tonight, Nukewatch and its kind of history to a certain extent, and what we're kind of looking forward to doing in the future. Nukewatch has been around for, well, more than 40 years now. People first started getting interested in nuclear warhead convoys at the mid-1980s, when people involved in peace camps and various other peace activists had seen these big convoys go past the bases that nuclear weapons were housed at, and wondered what they were for, and started following them. And we've seen lots of changes over that time. The government has withdrawn its tactical nuclear weapons, WE-177. It's also withdrawn the Polaris system. It's introduced Trident, and warhead convoys played an important role in all of those situations. We've seen the responsibility for operating the warhead convoy move between different parts of the state security apparatus. And we've also seen a number of different types of vehicles used over the years, and different operating procedures as vehicles grow old and the Ministry of Defence realises that its security systems aren't adequate to keep the cargo of these convoys safe. Now, I'm sure some of you will recognise where that is. That is Brize Norton, and that's one of the kind of earlier manifestation of nuclear transport vehicles leaving Brize Norton base. This was the kind of vehicles that were used to carry special nuclear material cargoes rather than warheads, up until maybe sort of 10, 15 years ago. The reason I included this slide, well, for a number of reasons, was Brize Norton seems to be becoming particularly important to Nukewatch at the moment. So we were really keen to be able to have the opportunity to talk to people from Faringdon and people in Oxfordshire, who obviously are kind of local to the base, to let you know what's going on, and also if people are interested, to try to kind of enrol your assistance. So a bit more about that later on. Obviously, over the years, the convoy has attracted lots of attention, lots of protest, including direct action protests from the earliest days until more recently, where protest techniques have become more sophisticated and policing techniques have also become more sophisticated. You'll be pleased to know that you can also have much simpler, much more straightforward, much more sedate protests, if you like to, as well. If you want to understand why we have a nuclear convoy, then you need to understand a little bit about nuclear warheads. And they basically have a shelf life. Obviously, the military want to be sure that nuclear warheads work as they're intended to. They explode when you want them to, and they don't explode when you don't want them to, which obviously is mostly all of the time. So they need to be sort of checked regularly and serviced to make sure that all of the parts are still functional and that they will do what they're meant to. So this means that they need to sort of go on a regular sort of maintenance cycle. After they're manufactured at the Atomic Weapons Establishment in Berkshire, and they're transported by a road convoy up to Coalport in Scotland, where Trident submarines are based. They're then loaded onto the submarines and deployed at sea. But every now and again, some of those warheads are brought back to the Atomic Weapons Establishment, either for checking or servicing or monitoring or sort of, in some cases, replacement. So there's a regular cycle of movements of warheads up and down the country. And here is a map which Nukewatch has published on its website, showing, you know, the main routes that the convoy is sort of using at the moment. As you can see, there's not just one route. Clearly, for security reasons, the Ministry of Defence doesn't want to operate its warhead convoys like a bus service, sort of operating along a set route for a set timetable. So they add all kinds of elements of uncertainty into the operation. There is a kind of a variety of routes that the convoy can take. It's not uncommon for it to travel by quite an illogical route and sort of travel up one side of the country and then drift over to the other side and then drift back again to the first side. There's a degree of irregularity and uncertainty in the movements. It's not sort of particularly simple to try to predict when the next convoy is, although roughly they kind of go every sort of 6 to 8 weeks or so. As well as movements of nuclear warheads, there are also movements of other sort of secure nuclear-related cargoes, particularly what we call special nuclear materials. SNM is the acronym for them. And they are transported around between RAFI's Norton, which is the entry point for materials coming over from the United States. And as you know, the United Kingdom relies quite heavily on the States for its military nuclear program. Materials are also transported to the Rolls-Royce factory in Derby, where the reactor cores for nuclear-powered submarines are manufactured. And there are also various perishable components transported up to Coalport in Scotland. And as well as that, the convoy, like anyone who's sort of making a long journey by vehicle, it kind of stops off on the way for rest breaks. So there are a number of rest points along the convoy route. One of them, probably the nearest one to you folks in Oxfordshire, is the Ministry of Defence Munitions Depot at Kyneton, or just off the M6, which is a popular stop-off point. They also sometimes stop at MOD Biston as well, by the kind of Ravenhill complex. So let me sort of tell you what you'll see if you see a nuclear convoy. If you've ever seen a nuclear convoy, then you'll know it's quite an unforgettable sight. I think the pictures of the vehicles I'm about to show you are probably the most photographed vehicles in the road in this country. You can't really miss the convoy if you're travelling and it's on the road at the same time as you. So people who are driving, they tend to see it. They tend to post pictures of it on their Facebook and Twitter accounts. And often they kind of do a Google search to try and work out what it is they've seen. And they find the Nukewatch website and they tell us about it, which is great from our point of view, because obviously it kind of helps fill in the picture of when these movements are taking place. And as I'll go on to say in a moment, we can deduce various things from the kind of patterns of movements over the years. So the first thing you see if you see a warhead convoy is you will see lots and lots of police cars, because obviously it has a police escort. Police will help with traffic control duties, sort of stopping traffic at roundabouts so that the convoy can get through. They'll also deal with any sort of protesters who want to protest with the convoy. And they travel in cars which don't look that different from normal traffic police cars, although if you look very carefully, then you'll be able to see that they are Ministry of Defence police cars rather than the civil police cars of the kind of county police force that the convoy is travelling through. The main thing that you'll see in the convoy is these trucks, usually 4 of them. They are Mercedes Actros tractor units with a special purpose-built trailer unit, which actually carries the warhead itself. And they're based at the Atomic Weapons Establishment at Aldermaston, and they're maintained and operated on contract by AWE and driven by AWE personnel. Maybe you're wondering what it looks like in the back of the warhead truck. This is the best I can do towards giving you a clue. This is a photograph that was taken surreptitiously by peace campaigners at Coalport many years ago. Now, if you look very carefully in the bottom left-hand part of the picture, you can see some quite interesting things. I don't know whether you can see my little cursor moving around, but I'll try and highlight them with my cursor. So that there, the big yellow thing pointing up, is a crane jib, and suspended from it is a case, and that is the warhead packaging case. So there's a Trident warhead in there about the size and shape of a motorway traffic cone. This thing here, this kind of green thing sloping down from the left margin of the picture, if you look carefully, you might be able to see that that's the roof of the back of a warhead convoy trailer, and that's the door of it open. If you look at it, you can see that the sides of it are really, really thick. There's a foot or so of steel armor plating there. So obviously these things are very heavy, and they're designed to withstand, any explosions or any attack on them. If you could see inside, you'd also see that there are lots of chains and things in there that are used for sort of tying down and suspending and holding the case securely, so that if there is an accident, then it doesn't just rattle around inside the trailer. It's kind of held as securely as possible. This picture is kind of close up. It sort of gives you a bit more of a view, rather blurred, I'm afraid, of what that sort of case actually looks like and how big it is. You can sort of see a couple of people standing by it there. Okay, so that's the warhead carrier itself. It also travels with an escort, an armoured escort of armed police officers. And they travel in these special police vans, which are called, I think the Ministry of Defence refers to them as protected escort vehicles. We in Nukewatch tend to sort of call them armoured personnel carriers, because again, they're armour plated as well. At one time, the police escort used to drive around in ordinary police vans, but after 9/11, they conducted a security review and concluded that this was a vulnerability that was not acceptable and needed to be sorted out. So now the police have these special vans that they drive around in. Also very important and often used is this. This is a tow truck. There's a number of support vehicles which sort of trail along a little way behind the main convoy, and the tow truck is an important part of that little support convoy, because convoy vehicles regularly break down and need to be rescued. Very important, but you'll be relieved to know not used quite so often, is this one in support convoy, fire tender, which is sometimes used to deal with convoy incidents. and sometimes stops to help in sort of ordinary road accidents if there happens to be one that the convoy passes. And last but not least is this beast. It's a customized coach, very easy to spot because you don't see many coaches in military olive green colour. And this is a control and command vehicle for the convoy. The Ministry of Defence call it the convoy support vehicle. So it's kind of helps maintain communications with the Ministry of Defence headquarters and all the police headquarters in the areas that the convoy is passing through. It carries a lot of equipment that the convoy use, including a lot of emergency equipment, and it can be a kind of mobile emergency control centre if there is ever an accident involving the convoy. So those are the various bits and pieces that sort of together comprise the nuclear warhead convoy. Also associated with the convoy, but travelling a lot more incognito, usually sort of scattered around quite a long way in front and a long way behind, are sort of much less distinguishable vehicles, usually sort of 4x4 SUV type vehicles like this Toyota. This one's black, sometimes they're white, there may be other ones as well. And these travel armed Royal Marines of the Royal Marines Fleet Protection Group, who are responsible for guarding nuclear weapons, both at the bases and also when they're on the road. So in terms of recent convoys, the last warhead convoy that we were aware of travelled in July. Mid-July, it travelled from AWE up to Coalport, and then it came back a week or so later from Coalport to AWE. And a little time before that, there was a special nuclear materials convoy which travelled from AWE to Bryce Norton, where it picked up a cargo, which it then took on to Derby before, as far as we're aware, returning empty back to AWE. Convoy usually has a bit of a sort of a break over summer, so we are sort of expecting another convoy sort of before too long, and probably we're sort of expecting another Bryce Norton excursion, maybe sort of sometime later in September. We'll see, because like I said, you can't really predict these things. Now, why do we sort of go to all the trouble of monitoring these convoys? Well, obviously there are a number of reasons, but probably the most important one is that Nukewatch monitoring is really the only independent way of verifying government statements on the status of its nuclear warhead program and nuclear weapons numbers. So back in the day, we knew when Trident warheads were coming into service, because round about sort of 1992, 93, there was a big pickup in the number of warhead convoys. New warhead convoy vehicles were introduced, and there were regular monthly convoys travelling all the way from the atomic weapons establishment up to Scotland. And we knew that they were transporting the new Trident warheads up to Scotland. And we were able, by counting the number of those convoys, to make an estimate of the number of Trident warheads that had been manufactured. And the estimate that we made at that time, Nukewatch made, was around about 200 warheads. And a few years ago, the government revealed the number of Trident warheads it had made, and the answer was 225. So we thought that was, you know, a pretty good estimate under the circumstances, given all the uncertainties involved, and given that we are basically amateurs doing it rather than sort of professional intelligence people. We also knew when Polaris came out of service when the Trident missiles had all been introduced. Then the Polaris warheads were transported down to AWE for decommissioning. But we knew that because we saw the convoys travelling, and we knew as well that it wasn't as simple as them just going to AWE to be taken apart. For various reasons, they were actually taken and stored for a while at RAF bases in East Anglia, at Honington and Marham, where in the past RAF nuclear weapons had been based. Those weapons had been withdrawn, but the secure storage facilities were still there. So the Ministry of Defence used them to store Polaris warheads while they were sort of sorting out other stuff at AWE and sort of preparing to dismantle them. More recently, we found out that following the coalition government coming into power in 2010, with the Lib Dems playing a role in nuclear policy development, one of the things that the government decided to do was reduce the number of its warheads. And they said that they would sort of reduce them by 2025. What we found over the 5 years of that coalition government was, doing a count up, that there was a net reduction in the number of warheads at Coalport. There was a sort of net flow of convoys and warheads going back down to AWE. And we deduced that over that period, we believe that roughly 11 warheads have been taken out of stock. And if you do the sums, that kind of works out at sort of enough 2 or 3 warheads a year over a kind of steady rate that you would have kind of reduced them to the target that the government had sort of set at the time. Something very puzzling happened after that. In 2016, when the Conservative government came into power, over the next few years, we saw a big upturn in warhead convoys travelling up to Scotland. And there seemed to be a net movement of warheads going up from AWE to Scotland. So we couldn't work out what was happening here. We thought, this is very strange. Why is this happening? Are we missing convoys? Have we got the sums wrong? Sort of something like that. The answer became clear when the government published its integrated review in 2021. And they said that they wanted to increase the number of warheads to 260. So what we believed was happening was that the Ministry of Defence had done what they usually do under those circumstances. They usually implement something before they actually announce it. So we think that that is what happened in those cases. The government was increasing the number of warheads slowly and quietly, and then when it had sort of done what it wanted to, or nearly done what it wanted to, then it announced that in public. Now, there's no way of sort of proving or disproving that, because the people who know within the Ministry of Defence obviously aren't going to tell the likes of Nukewatch about it. So we'll probably never know whether we're right or wrong, but that is kind of what I feel was happening. Right. So let's talk a little bit about warhead convoy safety now. We know, as I said, that the convoy frequently breaks down, and Nukewatch has put in requests for information to the Ministry of Defence under the Freedom of Information Act. And in the past, we've received some quite interesting replies. Nowadays, under the Conservative government, the Ministry of Defence seems to consider that its nuclear programmes are exempt from any disclosure under the FOI Act, and they will hardly release any information at all, unfortunately, and also, I believe, illegally. But in the past, we have received information under the FOI Act about what's going on. So, for instance, here's a page from a reply that we had sort of round about 2020 about convoy safety incidents that took place over the 3 years from 2016 to 2019. and it was kind of set out in this kind of little table format, giving a rough idea of when the convoy took place and a brief description of what went wrong and what the kind of consequences were. So you can see that there were 40 incidents. 30 of them were what they described as engineering incidents, when something went wrong with the vehicles involved, and 10 of them were what they called operational incidents. So something else happened, like maybe protester action, or the convoy getting lost, or there being a big traffic accident, or something that delayed the convoy itself. So a lot of these incidents are fairly trivial. You know, they're just something like warning lights went on, so that needed to be investigated. But some of them are more serious. Is a picture of a photo that was taken in 2007 by Tony Gillings, who some of you may know. Who was following the convoy very early one morning when it was travelling through Derby. And the convoy took a wrong turn, and then it took another wrong turn, and it ended up getting lost in a residential area. And the photo shows, you can see the kind of, leafy streets and maybe the houses in the background. The convoy, the photo shows these very heavy vehicles having to sort of reverse into a sort of side street, probably just like the one that you live in, so that they could all sort of turn around and then try and find out the route that they were meant to be travelling on. And that's not the first time that this has happened. I've seen vehicles myself get lost in East Anglia. And Jenny, you were telling me, I think, about a situation a while ago where convoy vehicles got lost actually in Faringdon. Maybe you could unmute and tell us a little bit about that.
Excuse me, can you hear me?
Yes.
It was, I think members of the peace group probably do know about this, because I've sort of written notes about it in various newsletters and things. I'm not sure when it was early this year, when we got a message to say that there was part of a nuclear convoy trying to negotiate in the marketplace in Faringdon. And it turned out to be two of the blue vans. I'm not quite sure, Peter, you could probably identify what they were doing. What they were. And eventually they went off up London Street, which is a very narrow road, up onto the A420, and presumably rejoined the rest of the convoy. But it was really very alarming to think about it, that these are part of a convoy carrying death and destruction, and they can't even keep track of two of the vehicles. So really it beggars belief, I think. As far as I know, it's the only time the convoy has come right into Faringdon, but obviously it travels very close, and Nigel is often reporting how it travels up the A34, which is not a million miles away from us, of course. So that's our brush with nuclear convoys in Faringdon.
Thanks, Jen. So we kind of know from personal experience, even in Faringdon, which is probably one of the last places where you would expect this kind of thing to happen, that things can and sometimes do go wrong with warhead convoys. Here's another incident, far more serious, which took place back in 1987, and which made big news headlines at the time. It was on the front page of the papers. It was the lead story in the evening television news on a very wintry day, when a warhead convoy slid off a road in Salisbury Plain and overturned and had to be rescued. I know that you were witnessed the recovery of that, Nigel. So I don't know whether you want to say anything about that. If you do, please do. If not, that's no problem.
Yeah, so I was there, and we were on Salisbury Plain itself looking for a cruise missile convoy, which was frozen and had to go into Boscombe Down in its upright position to thaw out in one of the American hangars. So we went looking for what we heard was a large vehicle accident. They told us to clear off, so we went round the back and walked in, and I was there all night beside that particular convoy at West Dean, which had gone off the road. The first vehicle had slid off the road, and the second vehicle had landed in the ditch. So they had people from Aldermaston there and the army separating us from the convoy. And we just stood there all night in -17. It's a night I shall always remember. So they managed to say at the end that there was no release. We didn't know at the time. And they hoisted it up with cranes and took it into West Dean while they sorted it all. So that was the most dangerous incident where they didn't bother to salt the road and went down, and that's what happened.
Thank you very much, Nigel. And if you'd like to know more about that incident, there's an excellent video that you can find on YouTube, which Nuclear Information Service prepared a few years ago to actually mark the anniversary of that incident. And I think it has interviews with some of the people who witnessed it and sort of archive photos and lots of other stuff like that. So that's well worth checking out. Here's something else puzzling that happened. And I think this is something that Nukewatch often finds. Quite often we sort of see something and we don't realise what's happening there. So we just kind of make a note of it and then forget about it. And then months, maybe even years later, we found out a bit more, which explains what happens. One day some of us were down at AWE and we saw one of these blue convoy vehicles travelling, carrying special nuclear materials, leaving the base. So it left the base. And then a couple of hours later, it came back. And then about an hour or so later, another convoy went out. So we thought that's a bit odd, you know, two of these convoys. And then a couple of years later, we had one of these FOI responses back. And sort of looking through the list of incidents, it explained that there'd been a problem with one of these trucks and that the clutch had failed. Which is not a trivial matter if you're driving a large vehicle with a heavy with a hazardous cargo. So the poor driver had to sort of drive it all the way back to Aldermaston with no clutch, and they then had to sort of get a spare vehicle and then set out again on the trip that had been intended. So as you can see, things don't always work as they are planned to. Here's another incident that we'd love to find out a bit more about. We had a report from a member of the public who we know, who knows a bit about these things, who said that on the M6, they saw the convoy stopped on the hard shoulder with firefighting personnel surrounding it and with fire extinguishers. So we asked for more information under the FOI Act, and the sort of slip at the top is the reply we got. Basically, we're not going to tell you because of national security and defence and confidentiality of the people involved. So we didn't get anything from the MOD out of it, and nor do we get anything from either of the local police or fire services. So if anyone ever does hear or find out any more about this, then we'd love to know about exactly what happened on that occasion. So like I said, things don't always go well. And the Ministry of Defence does have emergency arrangements in place to deal with the very worst situation where there might be an accident resulting in the release of nuclear materials. It's worth remembering that these convoys, that the warheads that they carry, they include radioactive materials, plutonium, highly enriched uranium, tritium. They also include high explosives, and they also include complicated toxic materials as well. So if something goes wrong, it is a problem. So the Ministry of Defence has published this document known as LACI, the Local Authority and Emergency Services Information, which gives general guidance to local councils and the police about how to respond if there was an accident involving a warhead convoy. In reality, councils would have very little role to play. The sort of civil side of the response would be fronted by the local police, but things would be very heavily controlled by the Ministry of Defence from Whitehall. So our friends in Nukewatch Scotland, they were interested in these guidelines, and they sort of felt that they weren't really adequate for the purpose of dealing with a convoy incident. And they prepared this report called Unready Scotland, which sort of basically looks at the LACI guidelines and explains why we don't think they're adequate. And so that report went to the Scottish Government, who conducted a review of their emergency procedures and sort of concluded that they were basically okay. And we're now kind of continuing dialogue with the Scottish Government to sort of try to encourage them to sort of be a bit more proactive in kind of engaging on convoy safety issues. These are the kind of reasons why we think that the safety arrangements as they stand are not adequate. In the past, we've managed to get information from the Ministry of Defence, again under the FOI Act, giving the post-exercise reports and the kind of official evaluations of some of the convoy emergency exercises that have been conducted over the years. And a big one took place in 2011 called Exercise Senator, which took place in Scotland. It took place at Prestwick Airport, not far from Glasgow. And the scenario was that there had been a collision involving a nuclear weapons convoy on the motorway at Motherwell. And the warheads had caught fire, and the radioactivity from the fire had contaminated drivers in the tailback on the motorway and also homes nearby. And as part of the exercise, they put together a kind of mock newspaper. So the Nuke Dust Disaster is the kind of headline in the photo from the front page of the sort of mock-up newspaper that they prepared to sort of test their communication strategy as part of the exercise. They put together a kind of a mock news video as well. So here's a sort of still from the news video. Serious accidents on the M74 involving a military convoy. No mention of the word nuclear notice, but you can see, you know, big traffic tailbacks on both sides, and that clearly would be the reality if there was a serious accident involving something like a warhead convoy. And if radioactivity was released from the convoy, then, you know, people in those cars might be at risk from that radioactivity. So it is a genuine issue. When we looked at the assessment for the Senator exercise, which had been conducted by the Defence Nuclear Safety Regulator, we were frankly appalled at what we read. The Defence Nuclear Safety Regulator, who, remember, they're actually part of the Ministry of Defence, so this is the Ministry of Defence criticising itself. They concluded that in terms of managing the incident, there had been essentially no Ministry of Defence input for 5.5 hours before the people would get into the helicopters and get up to Scotland and the accident site. And that was concluded to be a realistic time scale. So if it ever did happen, then that's the kind of times that we're looking at. And in the meantime, the lack of support from the Ministry of Defence had created, quote, major difficulties for the multi-agency response. The regulator concluded that the scientific advice from the Ministry of Defence was not adequate. So basically, if it came to the crunch, then Scotland would be left to deal with itself by the Ministry of Defence if there was ever a real nuclear emergency involving the convoy. And shortly afterwards, another similar exercise took place in Northumbria at Albemarle Base, which is somewhere where the convoy occasionally stops off for a rest break. And a number of difficulties were experienced, and the conclusion was that this reiterated the need for a wide-ranging review of the MOD's emergency response, and all of the response strategy and the plans and the protocols required, quote, an overarching fundamental review. So this is the Ministry of Defence internally not being satisfied with the procedures. So we know that that review has taken place and there have been some changes, but again, we still think that there are problems, and more recent emergency exercise responses, which I don't really have time to go into, sort of tell a bit more of that story. This is what we concluded. The emergency plans that the MOD had and its response arrangements for dealing with a convoy accident weren't really adequate to deal with the situation. Okay, I want to say a little bit now about other things which Nukewatch is beginning to get interested in and is working on. Like I said, for 40 plus years, we've been interested in warhead convoys, but warhead convoys are kind of only part of a network of nuclear transport that's sort of essential for keeping the UK's warheads in service. And we've also been aware that there have been sort of transfers of nuclear technology across the Atlantic from the United States to and from the United Kingdom. And these transfers take place in one of these aircraft. That's a Royal Air Force C-17 Globemaster aircraft. And these aircraft are based from Brize Norton. And if they fly to the States, they fly from Brize Norton, which is the kind of entry point in the UK for nuclear cargoes and exit points. So recently, well, not recently, but for many years, Nigel has kind of been keeping an eye on what's going on at Brize Norton and other air bases. And we've also been lucky recently that, the kind of plane spotter community publishes, quite a lot of information about its sightings, and one or two people there have been sort of, willing to sort of pass the odd piece of information on to us. So we've been sort of trying to sort of begin to keep tabs on these flights in and out of the country, carrying nuclear stuff. And there are lots of unanswered questions that we want to find more about, and clearly this is why we're very keen to sort of make things with Faringdon Peace Group to try to answer some of these questions. We know that not all of the flights which go to and from across the Atlantic are kind of met by a warhead convoy. So the question is, well, what are they carrying? What are they doing? So we'd like to try and find out about that. And we'd also like to sort of try and find out a little bit more about the kind of cargoes of the ones that are met by convoys. Like I said earlier on, we know that flights from the States have been met by nuclear warhead convoys and have then travelled on to Rolls-Royce in Derby. So they must be carrying some kind of nuclear material or component for use in the Navy's nuclear reactor program, because that's what's made at Derby. But we don't know what's coming over or why it's coming over, and why it's coming over from the States rather than Northern Aston. So there's another little mystery. And Jenny, when we started, you mentioned Lakenheath and the US nuclear weapons, which may be returning to Lakenheath. So again, we've been trying to sort of set up a little network of spotters in Lakenheath to sort of try to keep tabs on the base there and monitor flights in and out of there. So hopefully we might be able to draw together a picture of, you know, what and if so, when nuclear weapons return to Lakenheath. But it is quite hard work because it's a sort of a rural area, and there aren't many sort of people around the area who are able to help. But nevertheless, we're doing our best. Also of interest, of course, are submarines. And of course, these are, at the end of the day, these are the sort of the sharp point, the cutting edge of the UK's nuclear programme, because that's where the warheads and the missiles are deployed out at sea. Now, clearly, for a number of reasons, it's much, much harder to track a submarine than it is to track a convoy of vehicles. For a start, you can't see the submarine when it's left port. You don't know where it goes when it's left port. It goes under the sea. You don't know what it does there. And another very complicated difficulty is that, you know, all submarines look pretty much the same. They're all big and black, and trying to distinguish between them is really, really difficult. So it's much harder to try to sort of monitor submarine movements than it is to sort of monitor road movements of nuclear weapons. But nevertheless, there are some sort of good people in Scotland who are interested in doing this. Faslane Peace Camp, for example, is very close to the Faslane base and close to the lock as well. So, you know, there are people up there who try to sort of keep eyes on what's going on. And through the sort of watching that we've been doing over recent years, again, we've managed to find out some quite important and serious things. You know, we found out that the length of these submarine patrols have increased from the sort of 6 or 7 weeks that they were back in the sort of Polaris days, when Rob was involved in these things, up now to sort of 6 months or possibly even more. So submarines at sea for very long periods of time, placing sort of huge strains on the crews, and I think showing the sort of difficulties that the Ministry of Defence is currently facing in running its submarine programme. We also know from kind of keeping an eye on the other submarines based at Faslane that very few of them seem to be going to sea at the moment, and this sort of again suggests that the focus is on the nuclear weapons programme, and submariners are sort of being poached from the normal submarines to go on these nuclear armed submarines, making it much harder for, you know, the other submarines to carry out their normal duties. So these are some of the things, again, that we can sort of learn from keeping a close eye on what's going on. And finally, let's not forget trains as well, because nuclear reactor fuel, spent nuclear reactor fuel, when it's taken out of submarines in Devonport when they are in for refit, then that is transported by train, in one of these special flasks, up to Sellafield for storage. And again, by sort of keeping an eye on train movements, you can get an idea of whereabouts in the refit cycle, for example, a submarine is. So lots of kind of very interesting things that you can sort of deduce from keeping an eye on what's going on. So that's really what Nukewatch has been doing over the past 40 years, and some of the things that we're sort of beginning to do now, and maybe we'll do over the years ahead. I think that's probably a good point for me to end the talk and kind of throw it open to you for comments and discussion and any questions you might have. But before you do that, You can see a telephone number on that last slide. Do make a note of that and do put it into your phone, please. And if you're ever sort of traveling on the roads and if you ever see a warhead convoy, then do give us a call or send us a text, because we'd love to know what's going on. And the only reason really that we sort of know what's going on is from the information that we get from good people, good members of the public who let us know when they've seen these things. So that's the phone number, and the Twitter and Facebook and everything are there as well. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, Peter. Do you want to just stop sharing your screen so that we can see each other's faces? Great. And we'll just go to, there we go. Well, thanks ever so much, Peter. It was absolutely fascinating. And thanks also for the huge number of slides. It really does help you to visualize what's going on. I'd like to just start with my own question. A Trident missile, I think it's capable of actually carrying 12 warheads, although typically I think they put 3 or 4 on them. But nonetheless, those trucks, you said in the convoy, there's 4 of the trucks that actually carry the warheads. Is it always only 1 warhead per truck? It just seems strange to me when probably 3 or 4 of them all need looking at the same time.
Okay, thanks. I mean, I will invite others on the call to chip in, because there probably are people who know more about this than me. Nigel, Rob, others. It's as I understand it, there are spaces for, I believe, is it 8 warheads on a Trident missile?
I think it's maximum 12. But I think I read somewhere that it's typical that they actually go to sea with 3 or 4 warheads per missile, but it actually can carry 12 if it needs to.
Yeah. So we know that's right. So we know that. Yeah, go ahead, Rob.
I'm going to say they've committed themselves verbally, which means not a lot, to not sending more than 40 warheads to sea on 8 missiles. That's the present statement. Of course, it's not verified, it's not in law, so that's what they tell us, whether that's so or not. But 40 warheads on 8 missiles, they say, is a maximum loadout.
And remember that not every missile has to carry the same number of warheads. Correct. So, for various reasons, there might be, combinations there. So yes, with regards to the number of warheads carried by the convoy, I think we need to be a little bit sort of circumspect there. And obviously we can't see inside the convoy to sort of, to know what it actually is or isn't carrying. But it's likely, I think we can safely say that a convoy with 4 trucks is not going to be carrying more than 6 warheads.
Okay. And one other follow-on question, which is, has there ever been any call in the last 40 years to just move AWE up to Scotland?
No, I don't think so. I mean, AWE was, as I'm sure you know, was sort of set up at the end of the 1940s following World War II, when the post-war government decided that it wanted to build nuclear weapons. And the work sort of started at Fort Huston in Kent and in Woolwich Arsenal under the leadership of William Penny, who'd been involved in the Manhattan Project. And Penny basically sort of selected Aldermaston, which was a former World War II airbase, as the location for setting up the establishment that was going to build the UK's atomic weapons. So over the years, that has kind of grown and grown and grown. And there's been a lot of investment on the site. And a lot of it is kind of basically irreproducible, very specialised purpose-built facilities built to extremely high safety standards, which means they're extremely expensive. And if you kind of follow what happens at AWE, then you'll know that AWE is having problems even building, replacement facilities, one building at a time, to replace the kind of old ones that are, in not good condition. So the practicalities of ever sort of, building a nuclear weapons factory in Scotland, I think, mean that it would never be viable. It would just be too expensive and too much of an undertaking. Plus, of course, nowadays the political situation is such that people in Scotland would not accept it, and I think the government would not even want to suggest it for fear of sort of stirring up trouble unnecessarily. So whether the MOD like it or not, they're sort of stuck with Aldermaston being where it is and staying there, basically.
Thank you. The floor is open. Just raise your hand physically or use the reactions button at the bottom of the screen, whichever you prefer. Phil, take yourself off mute. Phil?
Yeah.
Right. Thank you very much, Peter, for fascinating talk and frightening talk. But is there a similar setup in European countries that have nuclear weapons? And if there is, what sort of liaison do you have with these people that are similar to you?
Okay, that's an interesting question. The only European country that has its own nuclear weapons, its own home-built nuclear weapons, is France. And although we kind of have links with people in the French peace movement and some of the bases, that there's not a Nukewatch movement in France. And I've no idea really what kind of arrangements France has for transporting its nuclear weapons around. So in that sense, the answer is no. We mentioned Lakenheath, and as you probably know, there are US nuclear weapons stationed in other European countries like Belgium and Netherlands and Germany and Italy. And we do have some connections with sort of people involved at some of those bases, and are trying to sort of encourage them to keep an eye on what's going on as well in terms of flights in and out. What's more interesting is perhaps what's happening in the United States, because they have obviously a big nuclear weapons program, and they have warhead convoys as well, which are organised by something called the Office of Secure Transportation, which is part of the USA's National Nuclear Security Administration. And if you look online on YouTube, you can find videos of some of their convoys, and also what's nicknamed the White Train, which sort of transports nuclear-related stuff around as well. So there is a certain amount of information about what goes on in the States, and we kind of keep an eye on that just to sort of, be geeks, I suppose. But interestingly, we know that there's kind of liaison between the US and the UK over convoy procedures, because on one occasion, Juliet McBride, who some of you might know, was arrested for, I think, stopping a convoy. And when she came to court, one of the witnesses gave evidence about a United States observer who was present in the convoy. So that was interesting. Yeah. And we presume that they were an observer who was there to kind of learn about convoy procedures. The other implication, which is even more interesting, but perhaps a bit less likely, is that the US insist on having somebody present at all times whenever UK nuclear weapons are moved around. But that's perhaps a bit less likely.
Thank you.
Dave, Eddie, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd be interested to know if the MOD regard Nukewatch as just a a harmless nuisance, or whether they've actually done anything like wave the Official Secrets Act at you. And if it is possible that if a hardliner gets into the Ministry of Defence, whether things might change.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question. And we would like to think that the answer is probably the first of those options, that we're a harmless nuisance, but probably we're seen as a bit more than a harmless nuisance. And I'm quite sure that the state security apparatus is sort of interested in Nukewatch. We have to be aware of this, and we kind of have to be aware that there are sort of security implications about what we do. So we don't tell everyone everything that we know. When warhead convoys are on the road, then we don't sort of report in real time about where it is. We have a rule that we only report convoy movements after they've happened. At the moment, the government has been sort of willing to tolerate that, but you can sort of see situations in which that might change. I mean, I have no doubt whatsoever that were there ever any kind of terrorist attack involving the nuclear convoy, then we in Nukewatch would all be immediately whisked away and arrested and interrogated, and there will be all kinds of problems. But fortunately, that hasn't happened yet, and let's hope that it never will happen for all kinds of reasons.
While people are thinking, Peter, my understanding is that all the warheads are actually made originally in the States. And in a sense, the only thing that we do is to look after them, if you like, as you say, maintenance and testing. Is that your understanding also?
Well, people often think that, and there's been quite a lot of debate recently. If you follow sort of nuclear weapons issues on Twitter, then you'll know there's been a bit of a controversy in Scotland because Ruth Wishart, who's an SNP, member of the Scottish Parliament, has kind of recently sort of sent out a tweet saying effectively that the UK's nuclear weapons aren't independent. So that's stirred up a bit of a controversy. What happens is that the warheads are, in fact, they are actually made in this country, and they are made to a British design, although clearly we don't know the details because this is all highly secret. But the suggestion is that the Americans have kind of helped the Brits in the design, and clearly there needs to be a certain amount of sharing of design information if an American missile is going to have British warhead that sits on the top of it. So the Brits make their own warhead. That's a kind of national capacity that resides at AWE at Aldermaston. The Trident missiles that carries the warheads, they're American designed, and the Brits lease them from the States. And whenever a Trident submarine comes out of refit, then it has to go over to Kings Bay in Georgia to have a load of missiles put on it, then sails back to Scotland, where the warheads are put on top of the missiles. So, basically, in a very simple nutshell, that's kind of the way it works in terms of the that infrastructure.
Phil, I'm not seeing any other hands up. Yeah, go ahead.
I seem to remember Juliet saying that the planes flying in from the States to Bryce Norton are breaking a law by have we got a law which says that the nuclear materials should not be flown over British territory, or is it the other way round? Is it the Americans that have this rule? I'm a bit confused in my mind, a sort of senior moment, I suppose. Can you clarify that, or perhaps I haven't made it clear? Is it the Americans that have this rule which says the nuclear materials must not be flown over their territory, or is it us that have this this law, which is obviously being flouted?
I'm not aware of this, and sort of the reality suggests that it's not the case, because there are flights of both American nuclear weapons over UK territory, and there are flights of British, well, not nuclear weapons, but probably nuclear materials over US territory. And the Americans can obviously fly nuclear weapons over their own territory. So I'm not aware that that happens. Clearly, there are all kinds of safety and security regulations about these flights. So you can't just put a nuclear cargo in any old aeroplane and fly it over the Atlantic. It has to be in an aircraft which has been certified appropriate and safe and secure to use for these flights. That aircraft has to have multiple engines, so it has to have basically 4 engines like C-17. There are all kinds of safety procedures and checks that the aircraft has to follow, the pilot has to follow, before the aircraft can take off and fly and land. So these kind of things are quite carefully controlled. Yeah, so I don't think it's correct that these flights aren't allowed over, each other's airspace respectively. But I think, sort of casting back into the depths of my mind, I think there was an issue maybe in the 1990s when these flights, which I think at the time took place in VC-10 aircraft, they stopped at air bases on the east coast of the States, and presumably then were transported on either by an American aircraft or by road, I don't know. But the speculation was that the reason for that was that the aircraft that the RAF using, didn't match American certification standards for nuclear flights over the States. It's important to remember that the RAF C-17 flights, they don't carry nuclear weapons. The UK doesn't share its nuclear weapons with the States. The States doesn't share its nuclear weapons with the UK. They want to kind of keep them secret, even among allies. So warheads effectively don't go to the States, although kind of components and possibly mock-ups and materials, they might be flown over in some of these flights. But as I said, it is still very much a mystery, and we would like to try to find out more to build up more of a pattern. So if any friends in Faringdon Peace Group are interested in this and have time and energy to spare, and would like to kind of help us monitor Bryce Norton when we think these flights are either coming in or going out, then we would love to have you on board. So do sort of contact me afterwards.
Okay.
Thank you. Peter Gloines, go ahead.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Peter. Really interesting presentation. I don't know if this is within the scope of this talk, but I was interested over the weekend to read about Russian hacking attacks on the Fazlane nuclear submarine base and GCHQ listening facilities, and I think Porton Down as well. And I just wondered if you had any perspective on how importantly we should consider that news.
Yeah, I'll sort of preface my answer by saying I would take with a very big pinch of salt stories that have been in the tabloid press recently about this hacking incident. If you sort of read the small print and sort of go back to the original source, it appears that there was a cyber attack of some kind on a contracting company that makes secure fences. The company is called Zorn, I think, Z-A-U-N, which I understand is a German word for fence. And among the people who it's built fences for are the Ministry of Defence at Faslane, and I believe a place called Cornwall Barracks out in West Wales, which is linked to GCHQ and the other places as well. But as the company says on its website, well, anyone can see our fences, you know, because they're there on the outside to keep people out. So, you know, you don't have to hack into one of these, our computers, if you want to know what one of our fences looks like. And they've also sort of said, well, we give specifications of our product on our website, and none of the information that we believe was hacked was in any way classified. So that's why I say I would preface, you know, that I would take all of this with a big pinch of salt. But having said that, you know, there is a serious issue here, because clearly there are big cyber risks when it comes to nuclear weapons, and particularly with nuclear weapons command and control decisions, and also with the possibility of nuclear espionage. With regards to command and control, then if you are not 100% sure that you're getting, you know, an accurate, unadulterated message, if you like, that comes from the person you think it comes from and sort of says, you know, what you think they wanted to say, if you're not 100% confident in that, then that causes all kinds of problems in terms of sort of nuclear command and control. So anyone who kind of can interfere with that in any way, either by sort of hacking or blocking or jamming, or even sort of trying to spoof these communications by sort of, you know, pretending that you know, that something's going on in the real world that isn't, in terms of fake news, for example, then that sort of muddies the water and makes it much more harder and much more dangerous. There's also the possibility of espionage. It's obviously incredibly difficult to hack into secure systems, but it's not impossible. What's more of an issue is some kind of insider threat or poor practice with somebody on the inside sort of helping to leak stuff out, or people not following sort of cybersecurity procedures and, you know, using their own USB drives or emails, that kind of stuff, for passing classified information around. Obviously, MOD has, you know, it's aware of these problems. It kind of has robust procedures in place. But again, like all of these things, you can never be 100% robust in what you do. So there's always a kind of a residual risk. And I was kind of once at a company meeting. It was, some of you may know the company Serco, which until recently used to be one of the companies that was responsible for running AWE. And I kind of asked a question about AWE, and the company chair was honest enough to stand up and say, look, I'm not going to say to you that in a company with 4,000 employees with a global reach, someone somewhere right now is not doing something bloody stupid. So, you know, MOD wouldn't say that, but some people are honest enough to say that. So, you know, the risk is there, basically. So that was a bit of a waffly and long answer, but I hope it gives some kind of insights anyway.
No, thank you. That's really interesting.
Thank you. Carrie, go ahead.
If nuclear weapons do come back, if American weapons come back to Lakenheath, will that mean more convoys on the roads, or will it just be air traffic backwards and forwards from the States?
Yeah, so the UK's nuclear bits wouldn't have anything to do with the Americans. The Americans would just kind of keep them entirely under their control, and the Brits would have no input in that at all. So we wouldn't expect to see any convoys or any sort of UK involvement in what happened at Lakenheath. It would just sort of be related to transport between the States and the UK. And again, you know, it's very early days, and we don't really, you know, have any kind of picture or indication at all of how those movements play out or work out. So yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Jenny, did you have your hand up?
Yes, I did. Am I muted or not?
No, you're good.
I think it's a bit of a follow-on to Karen's question, really. This business of who pushes the button. When Jeremy Corbyn was leader of the Labour Party, there was a great furore over the fact that he said he would not push the nuclear button. So who is, have you got anything, Peter, to say about that? I mean, what would happen?
Okay, I'll say one or two things, and then I will invite Rob Forsyth to say something if he wishes to, because this is something I know that he takes great interest in. If you want to know a bit more about this, then the best thing to do is read the books which have been written by, I can't remember the guy's name now, Peter Hennessy. And his book Secret State goes into this quite a lot. And he's also written other books, like Cabinet and the Bomb, which sort of explore in quite a lot of depth how this whole kind of nuclear authorization arrangement works. And effectively, as far as I know, and as far as we know from what is in the public domain, and again, like all of these things, this is all incredibly secret and incredibly sensitive. So things may be different to what I'm going to say, but as far as we know, the authorization to use nuclear weapons would be given by the Prime Minister. And clearly the Prime Minister would not just sort of do that on a whim on their own. There would be, some kind of collective decision involving presumably the most senior military figures, the most senior civil servants, and a sort of group of trusted ministers. So that decision would be made by the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister also has a number of what are called nuclear deputies, again, sort of 2 or 3 very senior ministers who are able to sort of give that authorization if something goes wrong, if the Prime Minister is not available or if they're blown up or something like that. So that's the person who gives the authorization to use the weapon. It then devolves to the military, to the Navy, to decide, whether they would want to use the nuclear weapons under any circumstance. So the decision on whether to use nuclear weapons and what to use them on effectively would then be sort of made by the military staff deep at MOD headquarters, and that information would be transmitted to Northwood headquarters just outside London, which is sort of, I guess, the main military operating centre for the UK. And we understand that that's kind of there's a video link to transfer that information, because it's kind of a bit hard. It's a bit easier to sort of validate that you're being told something and not being hacked into through video rather than telephone footage, for example, or a computer signal and email, for example. So that video exists, and then the people at Northwood will then send a signal to the submarine, who would sort of fire off the missiles. But it's important to remember that the US has a role in this as well, because although a lot of fuss is made about Britain's independent deterrent, and people will automatically, when they talk about pressing the button, think about the Prime Minister's role in that. At the end of the day, UK Trident is not really a British nuclear weapon, it's a NATO nuclear weapon. And going right back to 1962, when the US agreed to let the UK have Polaris, that was only ever on condition that those forces were assigned to NATO. So this would all have to sort of operate through and dovetail with the NATO command and control procedures, which effectively means the US nuclear command and control procedures. So there's a Royal Navy liaison officer over in, I don't know what it's called now, Strategic Command or whatever it's called now, over in Omaha, where the Americans sort of do all their sort of targeting and stuff like that. That in reality, Britain's nuclear weapons would only ever be used as part of a NATO American type response. you know, in the unlikely and hopefully never happening event that, you know, it ever came to that. So again, that's a bit vague and waffly, and Rob, I'm sure you can answer that more cogently.
Yes, I mean, there's the technical and the practical. From a technical point of view, the Prime Minister gives authorization. He is the only person who can authorize it, and his permission solely is needed. There is nobody else whose authority is needed to stop him firing. He can take advice from the Attorney General, from the military, to implement a firing plan, which has been agreed probably with the US as part of the integrated firing plan and possibly with NATO. But the only other person who could actually stop the firing is if the submarine captain decided he did not wish to fire. If he doesn't put his key into the keyboard, turn the key and say, you have permission to fire, the missiles won't go. So he has the ability to stop it, but he has no authority in the normal chain. His permission is not required, but he can stop it. Of course, he probably doesn't know quite what's going on, and the whole process depends on him obeying the last order received. And they say it's inconceivable that he would not fire. So the simple answer is just the Prime Minister. But other people can give advice, but nobody else can stop him, unless, as in a nuclear submarine, as in a Triton submarine, or as in a Polaris submarine in my day, we had a great big wooden baseball bat by the firing panel, and anybody who looked as if he was going to interfere with the firing change was going to get a hefty clump on the head. I guess the Cabinet Secretary, perhaps in a time of tension, might carry a club, and there could have been a recent Prime Minister who he might have wielded on. Interestingly, not long ago, in one of the media, a former Triton captain, younger and more recent than me, said in no circumstances would he have fired and pushed the button for Boris, because he just didn't trust him. And that's really interesting. When you go out on patrol, the captains have to go out confident that their Prime Minister is competent, intelligent, and will make a good judgment, because they have no way of telling whether he has. What happens if you change the Prime Minister 3 times during a patrol, as probably happens, is an open question.
This happened, didn't it?
Thank you, Rob. We do always like to let our speaker escape by 9 o'clock. So I think on that very surreal note, it may actually be a good time to stop anyway. And Rob, we've got one final question. Ian, last question. Go ahead.
Yeah, the final one. Can we have the phone number again, please? Can you hear me?
Carrie, do you want to read it out? Yeah. Karen will just read it out.
I've written it down.
Go ahead.
Here somewhere. 07824.
Yes.
140 058. Ah, there you are on your screen.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay.
And Peter, a huge thanks again for this incredibly useful and interesting meeting. Really very, very, well, worrying obviously on the one hand, but obviously also very, very informative. Thanks again, Peter.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Jenny and everyone. It's been a real pleasure. And like I said, if you would like to know more, and if you are interested in possibly occasionally helping us with watching, then Jenny and Stuart have my email address. So you're very welcome to get in touch. You don't have to sort of give a life commitment. You know, we fully understand that people have their own lives, and if for whatever reason you're not able to sort of come out when you need you, that's absolutely fine. So yeah, if it's something you think you can help with, we'd love to have you on board.
Yes.
So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks again, everyone. Yep.
Bye.